Final Fantasy X is one of the most beloved entries in the iconic Final Fantasy series of video games. First released in 2001 for the PlayStation 2, Final Fantasy X introduced us to a world that was frankly unlike anything we had seen before, with a captivating story, wonderfully memorable characters, and groundbreaking gameplay mechanics. FF10 has, in my opinion, without doubt stood the test of time, and still continues to capture the hearts of gamers around the world. This video explores the reasons why Final Fantasy X is still worth playing now, taking into account its twisting and turning storyline, fantastic soundtrack and varied gameplay. First, let's talk about the story and characters. Don't worry, I won't be describing any major spoilers, but obviously we'll be showing off footage from the game, so do be aware of that if you're coming to it without any prior knowledge. At the heart of Final Fantasy X's story is Tidus, a sporting young blitzball star who finds himself suddenly transported to a strange new world called Spira very early in the game. As he tries to find out where the heck he is and what happened to the world he once knew, he discovers that Spira is plagued by a sinister force, known only as sin. Sin is a constant fear for the people of Spira, and at times a devastating force that leaves a trail of chaos and destruction behind it. Tidus soon runs into a number of characters with whom he will form strong friendships, chief among them being Yuna, a young summoner on the island of Besaid who has taken on the formidable challenge of defeating Sin. Together with Tidus and the rest of her guardians, Yuna embarks on a long and increasingly dangerous journey to find the strength to defeat Sin. The journey through the world of Final Fantasy X sees Tidus cross paths with many memorable characters, such as Wakka, Lulu, Riku, Auron, and Kimahri, each with their own motivations, personalities, and backstories. As you would expect from a legendary Final Fantasy title, the party faces many challenges and revelations along the way that keep the story engaging from beginning to end. By the time the final credits roll in Final Fantasy X, there's a good chance you'll be hit by a wave of emotion following the game's amazing ending. Even though I finished it more times than I can even remember, to put it bluntly, if you're looking for a game with a well-developed narrative, compelling characters and plot twists that will keep you engaged from start to finish, look no further than Final Fantasy X. Next, let's look a little at the game's iconic combat system, which you'll be spending many hours engaged in. On the face of it, Final Fantasy X's battle system is your standard RPG turn-based system, with each of the characters taking turns attacking, using magic, defending and, in Yuna's case, summoning. What sets this system apart, particularly from the Final Fantasy games that came before FF10, is the ability to seamlessly swap out characters while in the midst of battle. Outside of battle, there is the brilliant sphere grid system which you'll use to beef up your characters, replacing the standard level 1 to level 100 leveling up system that features in other Final Fantasy games, and many games in general. Having said that, it is actually possible to finish Final Fantasy X doing a no-sphere grid run, though you probably wouldn't want to do that on your first playthrough, would you? The sphere grid is, as the name suggests, a sprawling grid that displays every ability and stat upgrade available, encompassing HP, MP, strength, magic, and everything else for that matter. As characters earn experience from battles, they can move across the grid from different starting positions and unlock new abilities and boost their stats. This system, which offers different ways to strengthen your characters, allows for a great deal of customization, as players can choose to focus on one character's strengths, or make all characters more well-rounded. However, if you choose to get involved in a lot of the end-game content, and put the hours in, you can turn Tidus, Yuna, and the others into absolute tanks by conquering the entire grid. The ability to easily swap out characters in the middle of battle is, in my view, a hugely enjoyable aspect of Final Fantasy X's battle system, and as you'd expect, there are enemies and battles throughout the game that are made all the more straightforward if you utilize characters with specific abilities and strengths in order to exploit your foe's weaknesses. In terms of the boss battles, it's safe to say that Final Fantasy X has some of the most memorable and also challenging boss battles in the entire series. And again, this is even more true if you choose to go beyond merely facing the bosses that are thrown against you as part of the story's progression and face the tougher additional enemies at the end of the game. Over its 35-year history, Final Fantasy has obviously experimented with many different battle and leveling up systems, but it's certainly arguable that Final Fantasy X's system remains one of the highest points in the series. It strikes a great balance between strategy and customization, letting us tailor our approach on each playthrough if we wish to, while also being able to cater to those who might want a more casual experience, along with those experienced RPG fans who want to face the toughest enemies. Whether you're a longtime fan of the series, or only just discovering it for the first time, FF10's combat system is sure to impress and provide many hours of engaging gameplay. Next up, let's talk about another one of Final Fantasy X's major selling points and reasons for its long-standing success, the game's amazing soundtrack, or OST. The game's music was created by legendary video game composer Nobuo Uematsu and co-scored by Junya Nakano and Masashi Hamauzu, and it perfectly complements the title's emotional journey. The soundtrack of Final Fantasy X is filled with memorable tracks, such as the heartbreakingly beautiful Suteki Dane and poignant Someday the Dream Will End, with many of them sure to leave a lasting impression on anyone who's played the game. Even after all these years and many playthroughs, it's still a joy to hear these amazing pieces when playing through the game. And of course, no Final Fantasy soundtracks would be complete without their epic battle music, and FF10 is no exception. From the heavy otherworld which is first heard during the game's iconic cinematic intro, to the more orchestral yet fast-paced battle theme, these tracks will keep you fully engaged in the action. And it's also no surprise for a game that is all about the journey, the act of pilgrimage throughout so many different locations, that the soundtrack itself seems so incredibly diverse, like a journey in and of itself, from the serene and idyllic Besaid Island early on, to the likes of the majestic and ethereal Macalania Woods later on. Each track paints a vivid picture of the world of Spira. All in all, Final Fantasy X's soundtrack is a masterpiece that sounds as good then as it does now, and a testament to the incredible talents of Nobuo Uematsu, Junya Nakano, and Masashi Hamauzu. Not just when it comes to video game music, but composing in general. Perhaps in contrast to the timeless nature of music, video game graphics are products of their time, having of course been created with whatever technology was available at the time. Final Fantasy X, whether looking at its original or remastered releases, can't compare to the level of detail shown in today's games, which goes without saying. However, the game's graphics at the time were a huge step forward, not just for Final Fantasy, but really for gaming in general, utilizing the power of the PlayStation 2, which seemed a world away from the original PlayStation. And I maintain that, yes, even by today's standards and the fact that the graphics are of course more basic by comparison, they are still perfectly vibrant and fleshed out, giving life to the world of Spira and its inhabitants. From the paradise island of Besaid, to the more busy and bustling Luca, to the frosty Mount Gagazet, and the game's many temples in between, Final Fantasy X feels like a blueprint for how to design an impactful RPG. It's a world that is immersive, engaging, and still incredibly detailed and intricate. That's before you even look at the character designs themselves. Don't get me wrong, FF10 does undoubtedly have some rather unique looks for many of the characters, not least the Crusaders, which always spring to mind. And that's before we even get to Lulu and her passion for belts. But regardless of whether you think some of these looks are pretty over the top or not, they all combine to create a striking aesthetic that certainly leaves an impression. At least, they sure did on me. And again, for the time, the level of detail and intricacy of the clothing, gestures and facial expressions was way beyond what had come before, even if at times it did feel a little overdone. However, what really stood out upon the game's release, and which I would argue still have an impact, are Final Fantasy X's stunning cinematic cutscenes. One of the things the Final Fantasy series became well known for was for trying to push the boat out with new releases in terms of each game's graphics, not just in terms of overall gameplay, but the cinematic quality as well. This is no different with FF10, and as mentioned before, it's clear that the step up to the power of the PlayStation 2 brought with it far more advanced capabilities than before, even though in the previous few years, Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy IX had also pushed the graphical limitations of the first PlayStation console to their limits. However, many of Final Fantasy X's cinematic cutscene sequences feel like mini-movies in and of themselves, conveying Spira's locations and its characters in much more detail. I would argue that the impact left by these scenes is still impressive, even today. Visually, Final Fantasy X's battles also still seem impressive, in terms of their flow and pacing. The game's battles are animated with a sense of fluidity and incorporate vibrant special effects and animations, which I think would help to even win over those gamers who feel that other games' turn-based battle systems can feel too slow or rigid. To summarize, at least regarding Final Fantasy X's graphics and aesthetics, they may seem dated by today's impressive standards, but they are still immersive. The game's designers managed to create beautiful environments and locations that bring Spira to life. Next up, let's talk about some of the powerful themes that run throughout FF10. Just a heads up for anyone who hasn't played the game before, but would like to, as we're about to look at the themes that run throughout the narrative. Some of the following points will get a bit spoilery, but without revealing specific moments in the story. In this video, I've mentioned aspects of Final Fantasy X that in my view leave a lasting impression on those who have played the game, but ultimately it is the story, themes and characterization that I believe will always be number one in terms of the importance of a game's legacy, especially when it comes to role-playing games that are, by their very nature, longer than many other video game genres. FF10 follows in the footsteps of the games that came before it in the series by portraying its own complex storyline that explores powerful themes and concepts such as faith, sacrifice, and even the nature of memory and existence. After his run-ins with Sin and his meeting with Yuna and the others, Tidus learns about the pilgrimage and nature of Spira's beliefs from a position of not knowing anything about them, meaning we also learn more about them as he does, allowing us to effectively shadow him on his journey, making him the very definition of an RPG protagonist. As such, we learn at the same time as he does about the nature of sin, the impact it has on the people of Spira, and the reasons why their faith is so strong, in the belief that it is that faith that will lead them to being able to free themselves from the burden of sin. Through the summoning of powerful beings, summoners like Yuna are seen as those individuals who have the strength and capability to be able to defeat sin, for the good of everyone. However, as Tidus's journey continues, and he learns more about the nature of belief across Spira, and the darker side of summoning and the pilgrimage, he begins to question the validity of this faith. As the journey continues, each character is faced with revelations and tough decisions that test their convictions and their willingness to make sacrifices. Final Fantasy X explores the idea of sacrifice and what it means, showing how characters are willing to give up everything for the beliefs they hold dear and what they see as the greater good. When the journey eventually comes to its emotional conclusion, we are left with a lot to think about. Final Fantasy X is a game that tackles complex and thought-provoking ideas, leaving us to question our own beliefs and our perceptions of the world around us. But okay, that's enough info about the heavy stuff, as Final Fantasy X definitely is not just about the main storyline. Let's talk a bit about a couple of the major side quests and mini-games that provide a chance to explore the world of Spira in even more detail, such as the Monster Arena. In the Monster Arena, which becomes more relevant towards the end of the game, players can capture regular enemies in order to unlock far tougher ones, secret bosses, and also be rewarded with some pretty awesome items. If you want to beef up your party to a pretty ridiculous degree, then the Monster Arena is the place to do it. Although even after boosting your stats pretty much to maximum, FF10's super bosses can still provide a challenge. However, the most famous, or perhaps infamous in some people's eyes, of the minigames in Final Fantasy X is Blitzball. Blitzball is a sport played in a giant sphere filled with water. And yes, if you've never seen it before, then you heard that right. You can control a team of Blitzball players and compete against other teams to become the champions of the league, essentially providing a whole other game within Final Fantasy X that can suck up hours and hours of your life. It's certainly done that to me before now. And what's more, there are certain things in the game that you can only get by playing Blitzball, so love it or loathe it. If you want to complete the game 100%, you're going to have to dive into it at some point. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video exploring just some of the reasons why Final Fantasy X is a timeless classic that is absolutely still worth playing now, more than 2 decades after its initial release. From its unforgettable characters and intricate storytelling to its still vibrant graphics and innovative gameplay mechanics, FF10 has all the things that make a video game great. Its enduring legacy is a testament to the skill and creativity of its developers, and the profound impact it's had on the gaming industry as a whole. If you've never played Final Fantasy X, or, in fact, any Final Fantasy for that matter, then I absolutely recommend playing it and discovering for yourself why it remains one of the greatest video games of all time. If you enjoyed this video, then please do give it a like, leave a comment, and why not subscribe as well? Anyway, until next time, thanks for watching.